There are two kinds of people who write about meditation. The first kind is, well, meditators. The best of these writers are people who have been doing meditation for decades, like Thich Nhat Hanh. But there are also people who write about meditation from a purely scientific perspective. Finding good people who write about meditation from a scientific perspective is hard. There's not a lot of them. One of these non-meditators who writes really good stuff about meditation is Stephen Burns, who looks at things from a computational neuroscience perspective. Another writer who writes about meditation from a scientific perspective without being a serious meditator himself is Scott Alexander, who has worked for decades as a clinical psychiatrist. One of the things that Scott Alexander writes about is jhanas. Jhanas are concentrative states of great absorption from the Theravadan tradition of Buddhism. People who do jhanas say that they feel really, really, really good. It shouldn't be too surprising that if you get really good at training your mind to do things, you can generate states that feel really, really good. But here's where it gets interesting. You see, people who do jhanas also claim that jhanas are totally non-addictive, which is strange, because usually when something feels really, really, really good, you want to do it again. But jhanic states aren't like that. People who can drop into those states just by sitting in an empty room for a while, those people can very easily just not think about jhanas and forget to do them for weeks at a time. So why is this? Well, there's a couple different perspectives you could use. One is the computational neuroscience perspective, but in this video, I'm going to use a different perspective. You see, I do Zen meditation. I've been doing it for years, and I can get into states of great concentration. These states do feel really good, and they make me feel good afterwards. But I don't do them all the time, even though, in a sense, I have free pleasure on demand. So in this video, I'm going to explain a few reasons why I don't spend all of my time blissed out in meditative states, and why I spend a very small amount of my time meditating, even though it causes me to feel good. One of the reasons I don't spend tons and tons of time meditating is that my meditative practice, which is a Zen meditative practice, has a large insight component to it. And when you get a whole bunch of insight, you need to process it. And after you process a bunch of insight, then you feel better just permanently. It doesn't make you feel better for a few days or a few weeks. It makes you feel better for years, for the rest of your life. It just raises your baseline hedonic state, which is good. But that's in the long term. In the short term, insight is destabilizing. How destabilizing is insight? Well, the faster you get insight, the more destabilizing it is. And if you meditate a ton, then you're going to get a lot of insight really fast, which can be mentally destabilizing, and rapidly destabilizing your mind before you have time to process those insights is obviously dangerous. So that's one reason why I don't do too much meditation. There are ways that you can get more insight in a safe manner, such as by going on retreat or living at a monastery, but I don't do either of those things. I like living a normal-ish life. So because I like living a normal-ish life, that means I don't want to do too much meditation, especially too much insight meditation, at once, because I can only handle so much of that at a time. So that's one reason why lay people meditators not living at monasteries, don't do tons and tons and tons of meditation, even though it feels good, is because that can easily break your mind, especially if you're trying to live a normal life. But that's just one reason. Another reason is that altered states of consciousness can sometimes get just a little bit out of control. When you do meditation, when you get into concentrative states, it can be like taking LSD. It can be like taking MDMA. I remember one weekend where I was doing some meditation. I got into metta territory. Metta is when you generate the feelings of loving kindness, which I think is just an oxytocin dump in your brain. I unblocked some stuff, which just let the loving kindness to flow through my brain. And that was wonderful. And I felt love and kindness towards everyone in the world. And it was just like taking MDMA. But unlike taking MDMA, which fades after a few hours, the reason I got this is I unclogged the mechanisms in my brain that were releasing loving kindness feelings. And so it was like being on MDMA for days in a row. And that felt wonderful. But there's a problem, which is that I'm living a normal life. I have work to go to. And I can't do my work while blissed out on MDMA. And even if I'm not taking the literal drug MDMA, if I'm blissed out on similar mental states, that's not compatible with living a normal life. And I'm trying to live a normal life here. So here I am, it's the weekend, it's Sunday, I've got to go to work on Monday, and I'm blissed out on meditation-induced MDMA-style effects. What do? Well, I sort of do anti-meditation. I play video games, I take a cold shower, I do everything except stabilize my attention. And after a day or two of this, I eventually got myself back into a normal state. And since then, I haven't really wanted to return to that blissed out state. Because, yeah, that blissed out state feels great, but being blissed out on loving kindness is, in some sense, no different from being blissed out on drugs. And I don't want to be blissed out on drugs instead of living a productive life. So that's 2 reasons not to do too much meditation. There's insight you need to process, and sometimes the chemicals that it releases just inhibit normal behavior. They make it hard to do cognitively demanding work. But in some sense, this doesn't really answer the question of why do meditators not get reinforced? Why do jhānic states not just cause reinforcement learning cycles that perpetuate themselves uncontrollably? And I think the big reason is simply because of the amount of time it takes to get into one. In reinforcement learning, it's really important that you do something and then the reward occurs instantly. Animal trainers, especially dog trainers, use clickers so that when the dog does something that the trainer wants, the dog immediately knows that it did the right thing. It immediately gets a reward, even if the treat itself occurs later. Addictive video games do the same thing. When you do what a video game wants you to do, it'll immediately display a flashy light and sound so that you're immediately rewarded. The faster that cycle can be triggered, the more addictive a reinforcement system is, especially if you add an element of randomness. But now think about meditation. For me personally, it takes about 30 minutes to get into access concentration, which is the doorway to interesting altered states of consciousness. That's 30 minutes of sitting in silence, doing nothing, before the interesting stuff starts to happen. Compare that to the maybe 1 second response time of an animal trainer, or the less than 1 second response time of a good video game. It's not even close. And so beyond, here are some reasons why doing too much meditation can be harmful. Beyond that, I think the reason that meditation isn't addictive is just that the feedback loops are so long, your brain forgets what is being rewarded.